Okay, you all know the drill by this point. NOMZ used Australian vocabulary. YouTube doesn't like NOMZ using Australian vocabulary. YouTube demonetized NOMZ video. Like the other videos over the past 2 months, demonetization kills videos, both their revenue and most importantly, their viewership by killing its algorithm. And like always, NOMZ says, screw that, and this dog water platform. And once again, the video in question has been re-uploaded. And to any other content creators out there who may be watching this, don't let YouTube's crappy system screw you over. If this happens to you, do the same. Don't let them win. Anyway guys, sorry for the disclaimer. Enjoy the video. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It's your pal NOMZ here. Let's talk about Matt Reeves' The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson. Well, what do you know? Shovelface actually fucking did it. The Batman was, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, actually pretty damn good. I'd go as far as to say fantastic even, or in this case, bat-tastic. Ha! Gay! But that's not to say it's without faults, and this movie definitely does fall short in some areas, and it certainly does make a lot of divisive decisions regarding how they've chosen to portray certain characters in Batman's life, his villains, and influential figures from his past. But let me be perfectly clear, this movie is what the film industry and what the comic book genre has been crying the fuck out for years, in fact. Probably since Marvel's Daredevil was cancelled, which of course, fuck you, Disney. But unlike the majority of superhero garbage that's produced nowadays, like I said, the public has been crying out for a film like The Batman. Something with an actual vision behind it that isn't afraid to take risks, that allows the director, for the most part, to helm the movie his way, mostly without studio interference, completely without inserting bullshit setups and sequel bait, deviating plot points to fit into a cinematic universe, relying on shameless cameos and deceptive marketing, and baiting endless fucking fan theories to market the movie for lack of the product's actual quality. And thankfully it doesn't suffocate itself with crappy humor and quippy bullshit to disguise the lack of talent behind the creative team, and I'm sure you all know which franchise I'm referring to. The Batman does none of those things, in fact, and is all the more better for it. It's undoubtedly a Batman movie and therefore a superhero movie, but much like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, the production crew and Matt Reeves decided to put movie first, adaptation second, and in most ways, the film actually benefits from that. The Dark Knight was a crime drama which had more of an action movie vibe to it, and it spends more time giving you a well-rounded view of Gotham City and its characters, including the main villain, whereas The Batman is centered entirely around being a crime drama with sprinkles of action throughout, and the focused almost exclusively from Batman's perspective. I'll elaborate more on this soon, but let's start with the beginning. Also, this is your last chance to click off before I get into spoilers, so you have been warned. This is a spoiler review. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the video. Sound good? Let's get started. Now, the way the movie opens up was initially a little weird. Usually when you're about to see a Batman movie, even with the Joel Schumacher films, there's usually like this epic build-up to the movie title, or at least the bat symbol that comes onto the screen, getting you pumped for what's to come next. But Matt Reeves decides to just go straight into the movie from the Riddler's perspective, and he just puts the title of the movie on screen. No build-up, no music, just wham, let's get straight into it. Now, in retrospect, I think this was done to reflect the lack of grandiose spectacle and set pieces in the movie. The way the title just shows up on screen as the movie gets going is meant to set the tone for the kind of movie we are about to see. And given how subdued and grounded this movie is, I think it was perfectly appropriate and was ultimately a good choice in the end. The movie starts off, once again, from the Riddler's perspective, who is the main villain for the movie, as he brutally murders who is soon to learn to be the mayor of Gotham City, Which, first of all, what a way to start the movie and set up your villain. He kills the motherfucking mayor of the goddamn city, and he did so brutally, bashing his skull in and cutting his thumbs off. Now that's one way to show everyone just how seriously you need to take this guy. Why he does this is revealed later on, but before I continue, I need to say something about the movie to address a certain criticism it was facing before it came out. It was welcomed that this would be a darker spin on Batman, but people, myself included, were worried that this film was going to venture too hard into trying to be hardcore and edgy and rely too much on excess to sell itself as a dark movie. Thankfully, that is not the case. This movie is dark, yes, it is violent, but it's not excessive. There is not violence just for violence sake. There's no over-the-top excessive blood and gore, and I'm happy to say there's also no excessive use of F-bombs in this movie too. Much as I love the R-rated X-Men movie Logan, this is one area where I'd say that movie went a little too far. Now, I didn't so much mind the excessive violence and over-the-top blood and gore that was in Logan, as I thought it suited the character of Wolverine just fine, but Professor X F-bombing like it was going out of style was distracting and felt extremely out of place.
How about you blowing him to make him safe?
Fuck off, Logan. You leave me alone with that fucking albino. He doesn't listen to me. Oh, yes. That's how fucking stupid they are.
The Batman has like one F-bomb, and it's not even delivered by Batman himself, and the violence isn't excessive at all, but it still feels real and brutal without being excessively bloody and gory. There's like one instance where Batman just goes to town on a guy in a subway station. It's the scene from the trailers that got everyone talking, but the movie goes out of its way to outline why he does this. He does this to scare the shit out of the other goons.
The hell are you supposed to be?
I'll get back to the fear aspect of this movie in a second, but another thing I wanted to point out is how self-aware the movie is. It knows we've seen many iterations of Batman, and as a result, we've seen his origin story several times. Even Joaquin Phoenix's Joker movie showed it to us when we didn't exactly ask for it. So that being said, the movie was made in good faith that the majority of audience members already know who Batman is and what his origins are. It's the very same reason why they somewhat tweaked certain details about his origins to put an alternative, but still mostly faithful spin on it. But as far as the immediate plot goes for this movie, and the current year it takes place in, I thought this was a brilliant way to tell a Batman story. It just tosses you into the middle of things, giving us more time to be in the midst of what's going on instead of building up to it by giving us an origin story. And instead, the movie opts to show you bits and pieces of Bruce's origins and history retroactively as part of the immediate plot.
I felt that we'd seen lots of origin stories, and I thought, well, one place we haven't been is grounding it the way that Year One does, to come right in to a young Batman, not be an origin tale, but refer to his origins and shake into his core.
But that being said, these tweaks to the certain details involving certain characters like Thomas Wayne, for instance, fans will undoubtedly find controversial, but I'll come back to that. As for the portrayal of Batman in his second year, Pattinson delivers a younger version of Batman still finding his footing in Gotham, and is still seen as somewhat of an outcast by law enforcement despite the good he is doing, with Jim Gordon being the exception. He's definitely had an impact on the city, having criminals running scared every night when they see his signal in the sky. And there's this awesome monologue sequence where he details how most of his weapons for fighting crime comes down to fear itself, because he can only be in one place at a time, having to, quote, choose his targets carefully. But even when he's not around, the rest of the criminals are shit scared of him that he could come out of hiding from any shadow. That being said, Pattinson does bring a unique spin to the character. He's stoic and gloomy when he's interacting with Gordon, as well as other law enforcement officials and bystanders. But he can also turn it up to 11 instantly when he's being aggressive towards criminals, and unlike the Christian Bale performance, he doesn't overly compensate to alter his voice. Though admittedly, there were times when I thought Batman was a little too reserved and subdued, but that's just me saying he was good, but he could have been just that much better. However, and this is unfortunate, Bruce Wayne and his relationship to other characters, particularly Alfred, does take a back seat for the majority of the movie. It almost feels like they screen tested Pattinson and Serkis Serkis as Bruce and Alfred, but they didn't trust their portrayals and their chemistry to carry the movie, and as a result, the majority of the focus is on Batman, which I'm not exactly complaining about, but it's just a damn shame we didn't get the most well-rounded view of Bruce's life, and how his Dark Knight persona is negatively affecting it. Instead, the movie just kind of implies the toll it's taking with just a few throwaway lines, but truthfully, this didn't bother me too much because the people in charge are simply trusting the audience to know who Batman is and how he affects Bruce's life, for the same reason they chose to exclude his origin story, because it's a story that's been told several times at this point. It's the same reason I somewhat forgive the exclusion of Uncle Ben's death and Spider-Man's origin story in Captain America Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming, instead implying the backstory of Spider-Man and bringing him into the MCU with Tony Stark. Well, you know, until Spider-Man No Way Home decided to shamelessly retcon that entire fucking plotline and just giving the role of one of Spider-Man's most influential characters to a walking, talking MILF joke because they all of a sudden needed to turn her into a character to contrive one of the dumbest plots ever. But hey, look, the less said about the MCU, the better at this point. But going back to the Batman, I know I'm not alone in saying the action in this movie is probably the best all-round action a Batman movie has ever seen. I'm not talking simply about a sequence like in Batman vs. Superman's awesome warehouse fight. I'm talking about the entire movie from start to finish. One of Nolan's biggest weak points filming the Dark Knight trilogy was undoubtedly the action, or at least the Batman fight scenes. Batman Begins and The Dark Knight did well to hide the action just enough to disguise Nolan's weakness, while still making the fight scenes entertaining enough to be enjoyable. The Dark Knight Rises, on the other hand, decided to show a lot more in-frame, and it led to the action often looking comical at times, and not in a good way. And it's here that the Matt Reeves Batman movie undoubtedly takes the cake. The way the fight scenes are shot, lit, choreographed are incredible, while still being largely in camera, surprisingly enough. Now, that being said, Matt Reeves achieves this by cutting a pretty big corner, and it involves Batman's suit. Robert Pattinson gave this interview shortly before the film's release, and my guess is the reason Warner Brothers put him up to this is because of the fan backlash from the trailers comparing him to Iron Man.
The suit does not make him invincible. It's just a few panels of bulletproof armor.
You serious?
Yeah, now that was a gigantic fucking lie.
Liar!
His entire suit is basically bulletproof. And unfortunately, that's the only reason the fight scenes are allowed to work as well as they do. On the plus side, the film does go out of its way to show that bulletproof does not mean invincible. Batman is still human. He still fatigues. Bullets still hurt like hell. And his body gets damn near completely fucked up in the final fight sequence. So much so that he has to inject himself with a large dose of epinephrine, nullifying the pain and allowing him to keep fighting with an adrenaline boost. So despite the Iron Man comparisons, the fights do have some depth to them. Batman still requires stealth, skill, and gadgets to overcome his opponents. But personally, and being completely honest here, I gotta say I'll take this Batman with his bulletproof suit and his fight scenes over a Batman whose action scenes have to compensate for this by having villains needing to wait for their very obvious cues and using their guns as whacking sticks instead of just shooting them for the sake of the protagonist's plot armor.
Cover the doors!
Like I said, and this is just another example, this Batman adaptation is movie first. Sure, it's more accurate that Batman isn't bulletproof, but the Nolan movies are examples of how the fight scenes can suffer for it. So personally, I find this purposeful inaccuracy to be mostly forgivable. How's about you just say that next time instead of lying in the damn interviews? Although, there is a part where the Riddler is about to blow this guy's head off with a bomb strapped around his neck, and Batman for some reason refuses to get to a minimum safe distance and just takes the explosion right to the face. Bulletproof or not, a bomb blast to the face? Forget the explosion. The shockwave alone would crush his skull. There was no burning or scarring or shrapnel on his face where his cowl was exposed. This point-blank explosion simply knocks Batman unconscious, and he's virtually fine in the next scene, and the movie goes on like that didn't just fucking happen. This is probably the biggest and thankfully only what the fuck moment I had during the entire film. But yeah, like I said, regarding the suit, putting movie first, mostly forgivable. Mostly. Another positive I'm proud to give the movie is Gotham City actually fucking feels like Gotham City. Thank Christ. It isn't as wacky looking as the Schumacher movies had, but as a compliment, it did have better atmosphere and personality than the Gotham City from Batman Begins. And I fucking love Gotham in Batman Begins. Gotham City is very atmospheric, gritty, and actually has some personality to it. After The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises completely sucked Gotham's personality clean the fuck out. Moving on, Catwoman. She was fine. Absolutely nothing special. A decision that might be seen as controversial is how they've modified the character's backstory, changing her to be mob boss Carmine Falcone's daughter. Not sure if that's comic book accurate, I doubt it, but I thought it was an okay, if not somewhat forced attempt to give her a sympathetic backstory. As far as I'm concerned, Anne Hathaway's Catwoman was much better, yeah, sue me, and I will forever praise Christopher Nolan for giving us this magnificent shot. That said, as far as Catwoman's concerned, there's a moment where I'm positive that Warner Brothers was forcing Matt Reeves to insert some identity politics because there's a line she utters where she's talking about tearing down the corrupt and the powerful, referring to them as the, quote, white privileged. And she even refers to Bruce and Thomas Wayne by name. But the reason I found this hilarious and not insulting, as I'm sure some woke SJW pencil-pushing douchebag from Warner Brothers intended it to be, is because Catwoman was telling this to Batman, who, as we know, is Bruce Wayne, who isn't corrupt, and who is actually trying to help the city. So whoever's decision it was to preach and virtue signal to the audience like that, kinda had that backfire hilariously back in their fucking face. Based on where Matt Reeves chose to insert that line, practically made it meaningless and fall completely fucking flat. Which is why in the theater, rather than groaning at it, I kind of just laughed and kept enjoying it. Now, some people may say, well, it wasn't trying to be woke. And others will probably say that it was trying to be.
Like, she's like the really kind girl who has her superpower is like to like heal everyone and like make the world a better place.
Poor women, we have to heal everyone.
And then Tifa's like this like sexy little thing. He's like, this is how every guy just like figures out what love is. And then it never, that's the ideal woman, and it never gets any, you never.
Either the one that's going to heal everything and the one in the short skirt. These are the options. Oh my God. This is the problem with the world.
I'll let you guys figure that one out in the comments section. Now, one thing that I thought was laughable was the insinuation of a romance developing between the Batman and Catwoman. I can buy that Catwoman had a thing for Batman, okay? After all, Pattinson might have the best live-action Batjaw to date. Not to mention he's trying to help Catwoman who is in need and she knows Batman has a good heart. Not to mention he has that dangerous mystique about him, the kind that James Bond possesses, that helps him attract women to him. So, and not to mention, in just about every Batman interpretation, at least that I've seen, Catwoman's just always had a major fucking thirst for the character anyway. So like I said, I can buy that Catwoman was into Batman, but for the entire duration of the movie, I have absolutely no idea what he saw in her. The romance isn't as pronounced as it was in The Dark Knight Rises, which was also extremely subdued in the romance department, but still did a much better job at demonstrating the chemistry between Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle. The Batman's insinuation of there possibly being a romance just comes across as an unenthusiastic box that had to be ticked. I'd put my money on studio interference once again being the cause of this. And thankfully, the supposed romance between Batman and Catwoman was kept to a minimum in this movie. Now, the Riddler, who I'd imagine is also going to divide some people, I thought the Riddler was actually great. He was menacing, if at times terrifying, but intentional or not, as I watched the film, I found he was venturing way too hard into Heath Ledger Joker territory. Let me explain. He's leaving Batman a trail of breadcrumbs. He keeps trying to antagonize Batman, specifically taunting him and laughing at him at every turn. And like, it even had the Riddler sending terrifying messages to Gotham City News, the same kind of messages that Heath Ledger's Joker sent in The Dark Knight. Now here's the kicker. As the movie went on, I was like, this is great and all, but it felt like The Dark Knight had already done this to a greater degree. So I consulted a friend of mine who's far more versed in the Batman comics than I am. And he confirmed my suspicions that this movie certainly did take some inspiration from The Dark Knight. That much is undeniable, but The Dark Knight also took some inspiration of its own where it arguably shouldn't have. You see, the riddle baiting that Nolan's Joker was doing in The Dark Knight isn't exactly what the Joker's all about. Sure, the Joker likes to test Batman, laughs at his attempts to thwart him, and taunts him at every turn, but it's not exactly common to leave clues hidden in riddles for Batman to chase.
That Joker card pinned to the body, forensics found 3 sets of DNA.
Any matches?
All 3.
The Joker's telling us who he's targeting.
Check the names.
Richard Dent. Patrick Harvey.
Harvey Dent.
Batman is meant to be the world's greatest detective, is he not? I thought his means to beat the Joker were to use his detective and crime-fighting skills. The Riddler, on the other hand, flaunts his intelligence and leaves riddles for Batman to show just how much smarter he is, which is why he purposefully leaves the riddles as clues for him to find. That being said, while the Batman took some inspiration from The Dark Knight, and while The Dark Knight stole some of the Riddler's gimmick to help characterize Heath Ledger's Joker, the villain in each respective movie is very different. Nolan's Joker killed for the fun of it, and he was out to cause chaos and anarchy, but he was also trying to bring Gotham down to his level. Matt Reeves' the Riddler is very different. He's instead trying to tear down those in power and expose the corruption in Gotham and bring them into the light. He's one of Gotham City's most scorned individuals. He grew up as an orphan after the death of Thomas Wayne, who was proposing what was called a renewal fund to help the city's disadvantaged people, including orphans like him. The corrupt city officials instead, after Thomas Wayne's death, exploited that proposed foundation for their own gain. At least that's the basic gist of it. Now that being said, it's also partially why the Riddler is extremely resentful of Bruce Wayne, the orphan that the media championed, that the world felt sorry for because he was the Prince of Gotham. But financially speaking, Bruce Wayne wasn't exactly disadvantaged at all. Riddler goes as far as to not even refer to Bruce as an orphan, saying that orphans don't hold up in rich, comfortable towers looking down on others. Orphans are 30 people sleeping in the same room trying to survive the winter. Orphans go hungry. Orphans have nothing. But Gotham City didn't care for him or any of the other orphans because they were nobody, and Bruce Wayne was the sympathy story of the media. The system failed the Riddler, and so he wants to tear it down. But what's both brilliant and ironic about this whole thing with the Riddler and his hatred of Bruce Wayne is that the Riddler reveals this information to us while he's talking to Bruce Wayne in disguise without knowing it. Batman initially thinks Riddler has figured out his secret, but as the conversation goes on, it's later revealed that he was speaking of Bruce Wayne as if he was a separate entity, while he's actually talking to Bruce Wayne himself. And what's even more ironic is the fact that the whole reason Riddler went on his crusade in the first place, to, in his eyes, fight against corruption, was because he was inspired by Batman himself. He loathes the person who inspired him without knowing it, to fight against corruption, exposing the individuals who cheated him long ago, including, in his eyes, members of the Wayne family. The Riddler's plan is engineered in a way that's consistent with the level of intelligence you'd expect from the character. It's not just that he's outsmarting Batman in every turn, but his endgame is also far more ahead than Batman could have thought possible. Because by solving these riddles, Batman thinks he's getting himself closer to finding the Riddler. When in actuality, whenever Batman solves the riddles, he's actually getting the Riddler closer to what he wants, which is to bring Gotham's corrupt city officials and mob bosses into the light, so he can kill them. The Riddler even tells Batman at Arkham he thought they were a team, that they were in it together. His admiration for Batman, his idol, somehow led to the delusion that he and Batman wanted the same thing this whole time because Batman was solving his riddles and playing his game. Now, of all the theories I had as the film went on, I did not see that coming, and I thought it was a great twist. The Riddler, accurate or inaccurate to his comic book inspirations, was a damn good villain in this movie. Let's move on to Jim Gordon. I initially thought the casting choice of Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon was a little strange, race bending a character for no reason. That being said, the longer the film went on for, the more I didn't mind the casting choice for this actor, as much as I initially thought I would have. And I actually grew to really like his portrayal of Jim Gordon. Side note, this actor also plays Felix from Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, and he had great screen presence and charisma in those movies, and he's really good at playing supporting roles, but I never thought he could play an excellent Lieutenant Gordon. But hey, what do you know, I stand corrected. He brought a lot to the table for the character, who isn't just meant to be Batman's ally in this movie, but one of his only advocates, and he proves on more than one occasion that he is Batman's true homie. And as I mentioned before, this movie just tosses you into the midst of what's going on. It's a movie made for those familiar with Batman, and so you're meant to infer from the dialogue between Batman and Jim Gordon that they've been working together for the past 2 years, and have likely had a lot of history with each other, so whatever snags occurred in their relationship have long been dealt with. And this is further shown by the fact that as the movie goes on, and Batman finds himself increasingly more mixed up with the murders taking place to the point where the police think Batman is actually an accomplice of some kind to the Riddler, which, as I mentioned previously, is exactly how the Riddler saw it. But despite that, Gordon's loyalty and trust in Batman never wavers. Not once. What an absolute fucking mad lad. Let's talk about Penguin for a sec. Now, I'm unfamiliar with Penguin as a villain in the Batman franchise. Yeah, I haven't seen any of the Burton Batmans, so I'm even unfamiliar with Danny DeVito's portrayal of the character. If the character is meant to be this menacing crime boss figure with a weird accent, then I'd say he was portrayed well enough by Colin Farrell. Thankfully, Penguin does lead Batman on a chase that forces him to introduce the Batmobile, or the Muscle Bat, or whatever the fuck we're calling it. Batman revs it up like he's prepping for a street race from one of the good Fast and Furious movies, and then all of a sudden it turns into Mad Bat's Fury Road, as he hunts Penguin down at high speeds through the streets of Gotham. Now, awesome as that was, they do, however, allow Penguin to be the butt of occasional jokes. For example, the part where Batman and Lieutenant Gordon are just grilling the Penguin for information, and then once they get what they need, they just leave him tied up and waddling after them. Now, that being said, in regards to the humor of this movie, thank Christ, we actually get a serious, dark, atmospheric detective crime drama that just so happens to be a superhero flick, filmed and portrayed with some personality, with the quips and forcefully inserted jokes kept to an absolute minimum. The humor exists in this movie, but it's very subdued. For example, the part where Batman is captured after being knocked out by a bomb blast to the face, as I previously mentioned. He wakes up in the police HQ, and Gordon says the only way out of there is if Batman knocks out Gordon and forcefully takes the key to the back exit. And after Batman does exactly this, Gordon says, you could have pulled that punch, and Batman just replies, I did. See what I mean? It's there, but it isn't used to fill up the meat of what the movie is and what its character dynamics are. In other words, it isn't used to obnoxiously pad out the dialogue scenes to fill the runtime, instead of just getting the fuck on with the damn plot. Now, speaking of padding the movie out, like I said, the way this movie was filmed definitely had some fucking artistry to it. Though if I had to nitpick, Jesus Christ, Matt Reeves, you could have filmed less of the characters walking, riding, and driving to their goals. And my lord, the amount of shots just dedicated to Batman slowly emerging from the shadows and slowly walking up to the bad guys was, by the end of the movie, just completely played the fuck out. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed how this movie was filmed immensely. It's definitely one of my favorite looking Batman movies. I just think if the director spent less time sucking his own dick, we could have spent more time exploring Bruce Wayne, Alfred, and, the plot. Lastly, I want to talk about the changes to Bruce Wayne's characterization and backstory. In addition to being Selina Kyle's father, Carmine Falcone was also presumed to be directly responsible for the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne. The Riddler reveals that Thomas Wayne had dealings with Carmine Falcone in the past. Carmine Falcone, who was responsible for the corruption in the city, and kept all of the corrupt city officials and law enforcers under his control. Very similar to the Kingpin in Daredevil Season 3. Anyway, one of the Riddler's leads points Batman to Falcone when the Riddler outlines that Thomas supposedly paid off Falcone to deal with a reporter who wanted to expose Martha Wayne's history of mental illness. Near as I can remember, it doesn't specify what exactly she had, just that it would have derailed Thomas Wayne's mayoral campaign if it was made public. Bruce Wayne goes to confront Falcone man to man, and Falcone tells Bruce that we all do terrible things when we're desperate, painting the picture that his father got low and crossed a moral line that Batman himself holds sacred, the do not kill rule. He also tells Bruce that once the opposing families found out the soon-to-be mayor-elect was in league with Falcone, and because they didn't want Falcone to have the newly elected mayor in his pocket, they instead had Thomas and Martha Wayne killed. At least that's what Falcone insinuates. Now this shakes Bruce to his very core, and understandably so, knowing his father was capable of crossing that line. So he goes to confront Alfred, who's lying half dead in hospital after the Riddler failed an assassination attempt on Bruce Wayne. And it's here that Alfred sets him straight. Thomas Wayne made a mistake when accepting to make a deal with Falcone, but he never ordered an execution on the reporter's life. Thomas Wayne made a deal with Falcone to simply scare the reporter into fearing for his life so that he wouldn't drag his wife's mental illness into the limelight. It was instead Falcone who was the one who took it too far and had the reporter killed of his own volition. And once more, Thomas Wayne didn't make the deal to save his mayoral campaign. As Falcone and the Riddler tried to sell on Bruce, Thomas Wayne did it to protect his wife and his family. When Thomas Wayne found out what Falcone had done, he was going to go to the police and expose him, but before he did, he was killed. Alfred insinuating that it was Falcone that killed Bruce's parents. Now, there are some Batman fans who are likely going to be upset with this, because Thomas and Martha Wayne were meant to be the saints of Gotham, philanthropists, shining beacons in a city filled with outrageously high crime rates, poverty, and corruption. And the whole motivation for Bruce Wayne becoming Batman in his origins was the Joe Chill storyline. A storyline that Batman Begins portrayed quite well. Just another day in Gotham City, a random gunman shot and killed two of the richest, most powerful people in the world. And two of the most innocent and kind-hearted at that. One of whom was a doctor who helped people for a living despite being a billionaire. The point is that this could happen to anyone at any time in Gotham. Crime is random, heartless, and doesn't discriminate, and so Bruce Wayne takes up the fight against crime as Batman. Now, if the Wayne murders were actually targeted, then that defeats the purpose of what Batman's origins are supposed to be. Now, here's why I'm okay with what the Batman decides to do with Bruce's origins, and some of the tweaks it makes to certain characters in Bruce's backstory. During the movie, Bruce Wayne makes it known that the circumstances behind his parents' death were unknown. They never found the person responsible, so Bruce Wayne, throughout his childhood, his training, and his first 2 years as Batman was motivated by the ruthless act of a supposed random crime that killed his parents, which is consistent with his origins and the Joe Chill storyline. Now, in The Batman, Bruce Wayne finds out these details regarding the true circumstances behind his parents' death retroactively during the immediate plot of the movie, recontextualizing his understanding of the events, sure, but not changing his initial motivations for donning the cape in the first place. Now, some of you may say, well, what about the way Thomas Wayne is depicted? Instead of being the uncompromising Gotham City saint, the movie instead went lengths to show that crime can corrupt anyone, even Thomas Wayne, if his family is threatened. But I wouldn't say it betrayed the character by any means. If anything, I'd say, in a way, it made the character feel more fleshed out and human. He did a bad thing, sure, but it was a mistake, and the character acknowledges that it was a mistake, but he made it for completely understandable reasons. But he never meant for anyone to get hurt. That was all on Falcone, who wanted to corrupt Thomas Wayne, who ultimately wouldn't play ball, keeping his moral compass intact. And after this was explained by Alfred, Bruce rightfully understood this and accepted it. A man was ultimately killed because of the deal his father made, but Thomas Wayne only wanted to scare the man after all, a man who wanted to exploit the circumstances surrounding his wife's mental health for his own personal gain. That alone is unjust, and Thomas Wayne wanted to use fear as a weapon to deter him, not murder. If Bruce was to hate his father for this, after Alfred explained it to him, that would make Bruce a massive hypocrite, would it not? Because as Bruce Wayne himself outlines in this movie, fear is Batman's greatest weapon for keeping criminals in line in Gotham. And all that being said, Alfred only gave his best guess, given the timing that Falcone had something to do with the death of the Waynes. The killer still remains a mystery, and not even the Riddler knew the true circumstances behind the deaths of the Waynes, because as far as the Riddler knew, Thomas Wayne had been corrupted by Falcone, and was in on the whole Renewal Foundation scam, meaning the Joe Chill storyline is still very much intact, if somewhat tweaked and shifted around. But regardless, Bruce's motivations for becoming Batman were consistent with that of the comic accuracy, because he only had these revelations after starting to fight crime. After he became the Batman. Right, now all that said, let me wrap this up with my thoughts on the movie as a whole. I was initially surprised, enthralled, and in awe of this movie during its runtime, but I left the theater feeling somewhat conflicted by some of the decisions made from both a filmmaking and writing standpoint, especially concerning the alternative spin on Batman's origins, as well as some of the other core characters in the Batman franchise. Not to mention some adaptation inaccuracies like Batman's bulletproof suit and some of the aesthetical changes as well. But having had some time to digest and ponder the movie, and most importantly why these choices were made and how they all blend together in the final product, what we ended up getting was a brilliant film noir detective crime drama that also acts as a mostly faithful adaptation of Batman, that while still being an adaptation, neglects some of the comic book inspired aspects to put the movie first, including having the self-awareness to not give us a repeat of the formula of the movie's predecessors, because this movie understands that it takes place in the current year, where Batman movies, and especially the telling of Batman's origin story, has become somewhat monotonous at this point, and the superhero genre has been saturated to death by repetitive, trash-fire garbage, most recently by Marvel. But make no mistake, the DCEU certainly contributed, and Batman was certainly a part of that. So I say thank God for this movie that not only told a fresh Batman story, but also completely shatters the fucking mold of what superhero movies have become. It treated its audience like they had some fucking intelligence and maturity for once, instead of treating its audience like a bunch of fanatics that will clap like seals anytime a new trailer comes out. This isn't your typical superhero or Batman movie for that matter, but it's exactly what the industry needs, and it's what fans of the superhero genre need as well. And it's my hope that this can act as somewhat of a catalyst for most people to wake the fuck up and stop accepting repetitive, mediocre garbage sprinkled with fan service, and to actually start appreciating good original comic book movies again. Joker 2019 was a home run for DC. The Batman 2022 was another. Well done, DC. Please give us more of this. The Batman was fucking brilliant. Not perfect, but brilliant. And it was more or less exactly what I was hoping for. You see, there's a very good reason why I adore this movie, and at the very most, tolerate Spider-Man No Way Home. You see, one was garbage, held up only by its cameos, and sold entirely on its fan service. The other is a good fucking movie, as well as an excellent crime drama and an awesome Batman film. The Batman is the best superhero product we've received since Daredevil was unceremoniously cancelled. Yes, fuck you too, Disney. Now with that said, some of you may be wondering where the Batman stacks up for me as opposed to the other Batman films. Well, Batman Begins is still my number one. The Batman falls narrowly, I'd say, under The Dark Knight, which is my number two. The reason I still prefer The Dark Knight, despite the fact that The Batman destroys The Dark Knight in certain aspects, like action and atmosphere, is because The Dark Knight gives us a more well-rounded view of the characters. It didn't just give us Batman, but also Bruce Wayne, and it showed us how his relationships are affected by the double life that he leads. We also got a deep dive into how the Joker operates and what makes him tick, and simply put, The Dark Knight had the better villain. Whereas Batman Begins had great villains, but it also had the better story. I'm not exactly knocking the Batman for this, because a big reason why that movie doesn't give you the most well-rounded view of what's going on is because as a crime drama, a lot of the plot and its characters are shrouded in mystery, and the film is all about unraveling that mystery as you go along. But that said, the film still could have and should have been paced better and given us a deeper insight into the characters that are meant to be staples of the Batman franchise. We should have gotten more Bruce Wayne, more Alfred, more Jim Gordon, and more of the Penguin even. And personally, I could have done with a little less Selina Kyle. But that being said, what we did get was one of the best Batman films to date, and an incredible superhero movie. Well done to Matt Reeves and his production team. Bravo. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of my video on The Batman. Thanks for taking the time to watch, I really appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of the video and the movie while I give this little outro. Just quickly, I wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members for their contributions to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, the Patreon link is in the description, or you could just hit the join button. Feel free to check out the channel's Discord server if you want to talk to the community about DC, Batman, Marvel, pop culture, and all things movie, television, and video game related as well. Check it out at your leisure, and who knows, maybe you'll make some friends along the way. Also, you can feel free to check out the rest of my channel and my secondary channels as well. I've linked them in the description. A big thank you and shout out to A British Potato for helping me with the audio editing of this video. I've linked his channel below. Feel free to check him out. He makes great stuff. And finally, here's one last thank you for staying till the end of the video. You are a legend, and I'll see you next time.